I always thought we had a good life. For kids, a wife who everyone admired, and a home that felt full of laughter. From the outside, we looked solid. People used to say, "You're lucky, Alex. You've got it all figured out." I believed it, too. I thought Rachel and I were a team. Turns out, I didn't know the half of it. The first cracks were small, things you could brush off if you weren't paying attention. Rachel started staying late at work more often. She'd always been ambitious, so it wasn't unusual at first. Then it became every other night. "Big deadlines," she said, always with that same tone, like I was overreacting for even asking. "You know how my boss is," she'd say, sighing like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. And I believed her because why wouldn't I? I was busy myself, juggling the kids and running my own business. But little things started to stand out. The way she'd rush to turn her phone face down when it buzzed. How her smile felt just a little too rehearsed when I asked about her day. The way she avoided me, physically and emotionally, in ways I couldn't quite put into words. I tell myself I was imagining it, but it gnawed at me. Then came that night. She told me she had to stay late again, another project deadline. I didn't push back, though I'd started to notice a pattern with her late nights. After putting the kids to bed, I was lying there, flipping through channels, trying to shut my brain off, when her phone buzzed on the nightstand. At first, I wasn't going to check. I'd always respected her privacy, but something made me reach for it. The message was short but enough to knock the air out of me. "Looking forward to tonight. You're incredible. Can't wait to see you again, gorgeous." It wasn't from me. The sender was saved as Travis, a name I didn't recognize. My hands weren't steady as I opened her phone. Her passcode was our anniversary. It always had been. The texts weren't just from Travis. There were others. Dean.
Marco.
All three of them. My wife, the woman I'd built my entire life around, wasn't just cheating. She was juggling 3 different men. I read every word, every explicit detail. Photos, plans, compliments she never gave me. It was all there, laid out like some kind of sick joke. My chest burned with this mix of anger and humiliation I'd never felt before. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew one thing. She wasn't going to get away with it. I wasn't sure how to confront her. What do you even say to someone after finding out they've been living a double or triple life? Every option ran through my head, but I kept coming back to one thought. I needed undeniable proof. Not just for me, but for our kids. If this blew up, I couldn't let her spin it as something else. The next morning, I acted normal. Rachel came home at 7 a.m., just as the kids were waking up. She had that tired, half-rushed energy she always did after a late night. As she walked through the door, she flashed me a quick smile like nothing was wrong. "Morning," she said casually, heading straight to the coffee maker. "Late one?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Brutal," she replied, yawning. "I'm going to shower before we tackle the day." I nodded, watching her as she disappeared down the hallway. It was so seamless, so rehearsed. If I hadn't seen those messages, I might have believed her. But now, every move she made seemed calculated. After she was gone, I grabbed her phone. She hadn't changed her passcode. Probably didn't think she had to. I scrolled through her texts again, screen recording everything. I saved the photos, the explicit messages, the dates and times. Once I had what I needed, I slipped the phone back where she'd left it and got the kids ready for school. My oldest, Ethan, noticed I was quieter than usual. "You okay, Dad?" he asked as I handed him his lunch. "Yeah, buddy," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired. Long night." He nodded, unconvinced, but didn't press. That afternoon, I started making calls. A buddy of mine, Nate, worked in IT and knew all about surveillance tech. I told him I needed some help setting up cameras at the house for security. "You expecting trouble?" he asked. "Something like that," I replied, not offering more. By the end of the day, I had cameras in the living room, our bedroom, and even the garage. Small, discreet, and linked directly to my phone. If Rachel brought anyone here, I'd know. That night, as we sat at the dinner table with the kids, Rachel was her usual self, laughing at their jokes, asking about their day, throwing me the occasional smile like she hadn't ripped my world apart. I played along, but every word out of her mouth felt like poison. "So," I said casually as we cleared the table, "you've got another late night tomorrow?" She froze for a fraction of a second before answering. "Yeah, we're still behind on the project." "Why?" "Just wondering," I said, shrugging. "Maybe I'll drop by the office and bring you dinner." Her eyes flickered, just for a moment, and I knew I'd struck a nerve. "That's sweet," she said, her tone overly casual. "But I'll probably be in meetings all night. You know how it is." "Sure," I replied, hiding my smirk. The trap was set. All I needed now was for her to take the bait. The day dragged on like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I went through the motions, dropped the kids at school, sat at work pretending to focus, but my mind was locked on Rachel and her lies. By 5:30 p.m., she was out the door, dressed in a sleek black dress that clung to her like a second skin. "Don't wait up," she called over her shoulder, flashing me a quick smile. I watched her drive off, then pulled up the live feed from the cameras I'd set up the day before. If she thought I'd just sit back and trust her, she didn't know me at all. By 8 p.m., my phone buzzed. The garage camera had been triggered. I tapped into the app and saw Rachel's car pulling in. My chest tightened, my heart racing. A few seconds later, the passenger door opened, and a man stepped out. Then another. Then another. It was all three of them. Rachel got out last, laughing and flipping her hair like she didn't have a care in the world. One of the men, Marco, if the texts were right, had his hand on her lower back. They walked into the house like they owned the place, shutting the door behind them. My hands shook as I switched to the living room feed. There they were, sitting on my couch, drinks in hand. Rachel was nestled between Marco and Dean, her legs draped over Marco's lap, while Travis leaned in close, whispering something in her ear that made her laugh. Then it happened. Dean pulled Rachel toward him, their lips crashing together. Marco's hands roamed her thighs, sliding that sleek dress higher, while Travis leaned in, his mouth on her neck. I watched, stunned, as the scene unfolded like something out of a twisted nightmare. They didn't waste time. Clothes hit the floor, and soon my wife was in the center of them, moaning, touching, giving herself completely. My hand gripped the phone tighter, and before I knew it, I hit record. Every second of their betrayal was burned into the memory of my phone, and my mind. I didn't think, couldn't. I grabbed my keys and drove home, rage burning hotter with every mile. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the live feed was still on, showing the four of them entangled on the couch like animals. I stepped into the house, the door slamming behind me. The sound echoed, and suddenly the living room fell silent. They all froze, their faces twisting from ecstasy to terror in an instant. Rachel scrambled to cover herself with a throw blanket, her eyes wide with panic. "Alex?" she stammered, her voice shaky. What are you doing here?" I didn't answer. My eyes swept over the scene. My wife half naked, three strangers pulling on their clothes, the smell of hanging heavy in the air. "Nice to meet you all," I said, my voice flat and cold. "I'm Rachel's husband." Dean, the cocky one, had the nerve to speak first. "Hey man, this isn't what it looks like." I laughed. A harsh, bitter sound. "Not what it looks like. You're in my house, my wife, and it's not what it looks like." Rachel stepped forward, the blanket clutched around her. "Alex, let me explain." "Explain." I cut her off, my voice rising. "Explain this." I held up the phone, the video still recording. "I've got all the explanation I need, Rachel." Marco moved toward me, his hands up like he was trying to calm me down. "Look, buddy, maybe we should just—" "Don't you dare call me buddy," I snapped, stepping toward him. "And you're not going anywhere. Not yet." I turned the camera toward them. "Smile for the camera, gentlemen. Let's make sure the world sees who my wife really is." Rachel lunged at me, but I stepped back, keeping the phone out of her reach. "Alex, stop!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Oh, I'm just getting started," I said. Dean decided he was done playing nice and lunged at me, fist swinging. I ducked and countered, landing a punch that sent him stumbling into the coffee table. Marco and Travis jumped in, but they were no match for the adrenaline coursing through me. By the time it was over, all three of them were scrambling out the door, bruised and humiliated. Rachel stood in the middle of the living room, her hair a mess, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. Her mask of calm was completely gone, replaced by raw panic. "You've lost it, Alex," she shouted. "You're insane." "No, Rachel," I said, my voice steady. "I'm just done. And now, so are you." I held up the phone, the video saved and ready. "Say goodbye to the life you thought you could have. It's over." Rachel stood frozen, clutching that useless blanket like it could shield her from the reality crashing down around her. Her lips moved, but no words came out. The silence was deafening. I wasn't about to give her the time to collect herself. I walked past her to the door, locking it behind the circus that had just stumbled out. Turning back, I kept my phone raised. "You don't get to explain your way out of this. You don't get to spin your lies. Alex, please," she finally managed, her voice trembling. "Can we just sit down and talk?" "Talk?" I let out a sharp laugh. "You want to talk now? After, what was that? Your team-building exercise?" I motioned to the couch, still littered with evidence of their betrayal. Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head. "It's not what you think." "Oh, don't insult me, Rachel." My voice cut through the room. "You're going to tell me what I think I just saw? I have it all right here." I waved the phone. "So go ahead, spin your story." Her tears didn't move me. The Rachel I saw now wasn't the woman I married. She was a stranger. "I was going to end it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I was just lost. I made mistakes." "Mistakes?" I barked, stepping closer. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk. What you did was a calculated, cold-blooded betrayal." "How long? Rachel? How long has this been going on?" She hesitated, wiping her face. "A few months," she said. "Ich lernte her." "Try again." "6 months," she admitted, breaking eye contact. "And the kids?" I demanded. "Did you ever think about them? Did you ever think about how this would blow up their lives?" She started, but I cut her off. "No. You didn't. You only thought about yourself." She dropped onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I couldn't stand to look at her anymore. I turned and walked to the stairs. "Where are you going?" she called after me. "To pack," I said without looking back. "I'll be staying at my brother's place. Tomorrow I'm taking the kids. And if you even think about trying to stop me, I'll make sure everyone you've ever worked with, every PTA mom, and every last friend knows exactly what you've done." Her sobs followed me upstairs, but I didn't care. Packing was a blur. My hands moved on autopilot, tossing clothes into a duffel bag while my mind raced. Rachel's muffled sobs echoed from downstairs, but they didn't matter anymore. This wasn't about her, it was about me and the kids now. I grabbed the essentials. A few days' worth of clothes, my laptop, chargers, and anything else I might need while staying at my brother Nate's place. He was already expecting me. One text, * need a place to stay. Long story * was all it took for him to respond with doors open. Before heading downstairs, I pulled out the spare phone I used for emergencies and uploaded the video to a private cloud. There was no way I was losing this evidence. Rachel was still on the couch when I walked back into the living room, her face streaked with tears. She looked up as I passed, her eyes pleading. "Alex, please," she said, her voice breaking. "We can fix this. For the kids, we can try." I stopped in the doorway, turning to face her. "You think I'm staying? You think there's anything left to fix? Rachel, you didn't just cheat. You burned this entire family to the ground." Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, the tears dried up. "You're not perfect, Alex," she snapped, standing. "You've ignored me for years. Always working, always tired, always putting everything else before me. You pushed me away." I let out a bitter laugh. "You think that justifies sleeping with 3 men? In my house? On the couch where our kids sit? Don't make this about me, Rachel. You're the one who couldn't keep it together. She fell silent, glaring at me. I grabbed my bag and walked toward the door. I'll be back tomorrow for the kids, I said over my shoulder. Start thinking about what you're going to tell them. You owe them that much. The slam of the door behind me was more satisfying than I expected. Nate's place was only a 15-minute drive, but it felt like an eternity. By the time I arrived, I was running on pure adrenaline. He opened the door before I even knocked, a look of concern on his face. What the hell happened? He asked, stepping aside to let me in. I dropped my bag and sank onto his couch. You're not going to believe this, I said, pulling out my phone. His eyes widened as he watched the video, the color draining from his face. No way, he muttered, shaking his head. This can't be real. Oh, it's real, I said, leaning back. And it's just the beginning. Tomorrow I'm taking the kids. After that, I'm burning her whole damn world to the ground. Nate didn't say anything for a while, just handed me a beer and sat down beside me. What's the plan? He asked finally. I took a long swig before answering. Divorce. Full custody. And if she tries to fight me, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what she's done. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces. Rachel's fake tears, Marco's smug grin, Dean's cocky arrogance. The memory burned like acid. By the time the sun rose, I was ready to take the next step. Nate had already left for work by the time I showered and got dressed. He left a note on the kitchen counter. Asterisk call if you need anything. Don't do anything stupid. Asterisk I snorted at that. Too late. First on the list was the kids. I wasn't going to let Rachel have the chance to poison their perception of what had happened. They deserved to know the truth. Not all the details, but enough to understand why everything was about to change. When I pulled into the driveway, Rachel's car was still parked out front. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The house was eerily quiet, and for a moment, I thought she wasn't home. Then I saw her in the kitchen, sipping coffee like it was any other morning. Alex, she said, setting the mug down. She looked worn out, like she hadn't slept either. Can we talk before the kids come back? I ignored her and went straight to the stairs. They're not here, she said quickly, standing. I dropped them at my sister's last night. I stopped halfway up the steps and turned to face her. Why? I thought they didn't need to see us like this, she said softly. Spare me the act, I snapped. You didn't want them around because you know I'm taking them with me. She flinched, but her voice hardened. You can't just take them, Alex. They need stability. They need a parent who isn't a lying, manipulative cheat. I interrupted, my voice rising. You don't get to play the martyr here, Rachel. You gave up that right the second you brought those men into our lives. Her face twisted, but she didn't respond. Instead, she folded her arms and leaned against the counter. So what's your plan? You're just going to rip them away from their mother. No, I said evenly. You did that. I'm just cleaning up the mess. She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. I'm picking them up this afternoon. Pack whatever they'll need for the week. We'll figure out a schedule later. You can't do this, she said, her voice breaking. Alex, please. I'm their mother. I stared at her for a long moment. Then you should have acted like one. I left without another word. After picking up the kids, I took them to a park nearby, watching them run and play, oblivious to the storm brewing around them. I wanted to protect them from all of it, but there was no avoiding the truth. Later, as we sat at a picnic table eating ice cream, Ethan, the oldest, looked at me with a furrowed brow. Dad, he said, is everything okay with you and Mom? The question hit like a punch to the gut. I looked at his wide, curious eyes and forced myself to stay calm. We're figuring some things out, buddy, I said gently. But no matter what happens, you and your siblings are my #1 priority. Always. He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. After dropping the kids off at Nate's, I sat in my car, staring at the dashboard. I'd done the hard part, at least that's what I told myself. Getting them out of the house, shielding them from Rachel's lies, and trying to keep their world from collapsing too quickly. But the truth was, the hard part was just beginning. I wasn't going to let Rachel walk away from this unscathed. She'd lied, cheated, and destroyed the life. And now, she was going to feel every ounce of the pain she'd caused. My first stop was my lawyer's office. The receptionist greeted me with a polite smile, but when I asked to see Jacob, that's Jacob Adler, divorce attorney extraordinaire, her expression changed. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, glancing at her computer. "No," I said bluntly, "but he's going to want to hear this." 5 minutes later, I was sitting across from Jacob, a man in his late 40s with sharp features and a sharper mind. He adjusted his glasses and leaned back in his chair as I laid everything out for him. "3 men," he repeated, his eyebrows raised. "At the same time?" "Yeah," I said, handing him my phone. "And I have the video to prove it." Jacob watched the footage, his face unreadable. When it ended, he let out a low whistle. "Well, Alex, I've seen a lot of messy divorces, but this is something else. I want full custody," I said firmly, "and I want the divorce to hit her where it hurts. I don't care about the money. I want her reputation gone." Jacob nodded, scribbling notes on a legal pad. "You've got a strong case. The video alone is damning, not to mention the emotional damage she's caused. We'll file for divorce immediately, on grounds of adultery. As for the custody, that'll depend on how hard she fights. But this evidence gives us a major advantage." "And the video?" I asked, my voice cold. He hesitated, setting his pen down. "Alex, I have to advise against posting it publicly. It could backfire legally, especially if she claims you're trying to defame or harass her." I leaned forward, gripping the edge of his desk. "She paraded 3 men into my house. I don't care about the legal risks. I want people to see her for what she is." Jacob sighed. "Let me draft a strategy first. If you post it, you lose control of the narrative. Trust me on this." I didn't reply, but my mind was already spinning. When I got back to Nate's, I sat on the couch with my laptop. Jacob's words echoed in my head, but the thought of Rachel getting away with even a shred of dignity was unbearable. I opened the video, hovered over the upload button, and paused. Then my phone buzzed. It was Rachel. *, "We need to talk. Please, Alex. *. I stared at the screen, anger flaring again. She had no idea what was coming. I replied with one word, "*soon. *. Rachel's text lingered in my mind the rest of the night, but it didn't shake my resolve. Her pleas, her tears, none of it mattered anymore. She had already decided what I was worth when she invited those men into our lives. It was time for everyone else to see her for who she really was. The next morning, I sat at Nate's kitchen table with my laptop in front of me. The video was queued up, trimmed to show exactly what mattered. Rachel and her lovers tangled on our couch, the laughter, the kisses, and every damning detail. It wasn't out of malice, it was out of necessity. This was my weapon, and I wasn't afraid to use it. I clicked upload. I didn't attach my name. The post was anonymous, with a simple caption. *, "This is what betrayal looks like. 14 years of marriage destroyed in one night." It was brutal, but it was honest. Within an hour, the video started gaining traction. Comments poured in, some sympathetic, others angry, a few doubting it could be real. But the damage was done. The local PDA group, Rachel's coworkers, and mutual friends had started sharing it. By the afternoon, my phone was blowing up. Calls, texts, voicemails, some from friends, some from strangers. Even Jacob called. "What the hell did you do, Alex?" he asked, his voice tight with frustration. "What I had to," I replied. "I'm not letting her spin this." He sighed. "I get it, but this could complicate things. If she uses this in court, it might affect your custody claim." "I'll deal with it," I said, hanging up. It didn't take long for Rachel to call. The screen lit up with her name, and for a moment, I considered ignoring it. But no, I wanted to hear her squirm. "What did you do?" she shouted the second I picked up. Her voice was raw. a mix of fury and desperation. "How could you do this to me? You mean exposing your lies?" I said, my tone calm. "I just thought people should know the truth." "This is beyond cruel," she cried. "You're ruining my life, Alex." "Your life?" I snapped. "You ruined our life, Rachel. You brought this on yourself." There was a long pause, broken only by her uneven breathing. Then her tone shifted, colder now. "You think this makes you look good? You think people won't judge you for airing our private business like this?" "I don't care what they think," I said. "I care about making sure you don't get to rewrite history." "I'll fight you," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "For the kids, for everything. You won't win." I smiled bitterly. "You've already lost, Rachel. You just haven't realized it yet." The fallout was swift. By evening, Rachel's social media accounts were gone. Her name was trending in our small town, and mutual friends were texting me nonstop. Some offered support, while others accused me of taking things too far. I didn't care. The day after the video went viral, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Friends, family, even coworkers reached out with messages that ranged from sympathy to outright shock. Some expressed support, others questioned if I'd gone too far. I didn't care. Rachel's silence since her last call told me I'd hit her where it hurt most. Her image. She had always been the polished, charming professional, the woman everyone admired. Now that facade was shattered. Around noon, I got a call from Jacob. "We need to talk," he said, skipping the pleasantries. "About what?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Rachel's lawyer filed an emergency petition," he said, his tone clipped. "She's asking for temporary custody of the kids, claiming the video proves you're unstable and unfit." I clenched my jaw. "Unfit? She brought 3 men into our house. She's arguing that your actions, posting the video, were reckless and harmful to the children's well-being," Jacob said. "The court might see it as vindictive, Alex. We need to be careful." I took a deep breath, my mind racing. "So what do? "We fight back," Jacob said firmly. "But you have to trust me. No more stunts, no more videos. We need to focus on proving you're the stable parent here." That evening, I picked up the kids from Nate's house. I'd spent the entire day stewing over Rachel's audacity, but seeing my kids grounded me. They were the reason I was doing this, not for revenge, but to protect them. "Dad, why isn't Mom calling us?" Ethan asked as we drove back to Nate's. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror, my heart sinking. "She's busy right now," I said carefully. He frowned but didn't press further. The younger ones, thankfully, were too distracted by their tablets to notice the tension in my voice. When we got back, I sat Ethan down. "I need to tell you something, buddy," I said, keeping my tone as calm as I could. "Things are going to be different for a while. Mom and we're not getting along right now. But I promise, no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you and your siblings." His eyes searched mine, and after a long pause, he nodded. "Okay, Dad." The next morning, I walked into the courthouse with Jacob by my side. Rachel was already there, dressed sharply in a navy blazer, her face a mask of calm. But when her eyes met mine, I saw the cracks. Her lawyer, a slick-looking guy named Callahan, stood and greeted Jacob with a handshake that was all teeth. "This should be straightforward," he said, glancing at me. "Not as straightforward as you think," Jacob replied coolly. The hearing was brief. Callahan argued that my actions were irresponsible, and that the video's public release proved I wasn't acting in the children's best interests. Jacob countered with the facts. Rachel's infidelity, the video's necessity as evidence, and my consistent role as the children's primary caregiver. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, listened carefully. When she finally spoke, her tone was measured. "I'm granting temporary joint custody," she said, her gaze shifting between Rachel and me. "Both parents will share responsibilities until the final custody hearing. However, I'm instructing both parties to refrain from actions that could further escalate this situation." Rachel's lips tightened, but she didn't argue. I could see the fury simmering just below the surface. As we left the courtroom, She stopped me in the hallway. "You think this is over?" she hissed. I leaned in, lowering my voice. "It's not over until the truth is out. And trust me, Rachel, it's just getting started." The courthouse decision didn't feel like a win. Joint custody meant I had to deal with Rachel, and I wasn't ready to stomach her manipulations. But if she thought this was over, she was dead wrong. I had more cards to play, and I wasn't about to fold. The first step was getting the kids on solid ground. I used the next few days to settle them into a routine at Nate's house, keeping things as normal as possible. Ethan, always the observant one, seemed to sense the tension. "Are we going back to the house, Dad?" he asked one evening as we sat on Nate's couch. "Not yet, buddy," I said. "We'll figure it out soon." He nodded but stayed quiet. I knew he was piecing things together, even if he didn't say it outright. Meanwhile, I kept working with Jacob to strengthen my case. We dug deeper into Rachel's finances, communications, and every skeleton she thought she'd buried. And what we found was staggering. Rachel wasn't just cheating. She was funding her double life using our joint accounts. Hotel stays, gifts for her lovers, expensive dinners. It was all there, laid out in neat little transaction records. "She's bold. I'll give her that," Jacob said, sliding the documents across his desk. "It's theft," I said, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. "She's been stealing from her own family." Jacob nodded. "We'll use this. Financial irresponsibility, infidelity, it all paints a picture of instability. But we need to be smart about how we present it." "I want it all in the open," I said firmly. "No more hiding. No more lies." The opportunity came sooner than I expected. 2 weeks later, Rachel hosted a small gathering at her sister's house. A feeble attempt to control the narrative. Mutual friends and PDA members were invited, all under the guise of clearing the air. I wasn't invited, of course, but I had a plan. The night of the gathering, I sent a package to Rachel's sister's house. Inside was a USB drive containing the evidence Jacob and I had collected, financial records, text message screenshots, and, yes, the infamous video. Along with it was a note. Asterisk, "The truth deserves an audience. Enjoy the show." Asterisk. By 10 p.m., my phone started blowing up. Texts, missed calls, and voice messages poured in. Some from Rachel, others from shocked friends. "What the hell did you do?" Rachel's voice hissed through one voicemail. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me?" I didn't respond. Instead, I waited for the fallout to hit. The next day, word spread like wildfire. The PDA group chat exploded with messages, and several of Rachel's closest friends cut ties with her immediately. Even her sister called me, furious at first but eventually admitting, "I can't believe she's been lying to all of us." Rachel, on the other hand, went radio silent. Her social media accounts were deactivated, and she stopped calling. For once, it seemed like she had run out of ways to spin her story. At night, as I sat alone in the guest room at Nate's, I couldn't help but feel the weight of everything. Revenge had felt good in the moment, but now that the dust was settling, a hollow emptiness crept in. Was it worth it? The question lingered, gnawing at me. I had exposed Rachel's lies, protected the kids, and fought back. But at what cost? As I stared at the ceiling, one thing became clear. It was time to focus on the future. My kids needed me, and I wasn't going to let this mess define the rest of our lives. The days that followed were a blur of legal meetings, paperwork, and awkward exchanges with Rachel during custody handoffs. She avoided eye contact and kept her conversations clipped, but the tension between us was palpable. She was furious, humiliated, and desperate to regain control, but her moves were limited now. Jacob had filed the formal divorce papers, citing adultery and financial misconduct. With the evidence we had, it was a slam dunk. Rachel's lawyer tried to push for alimony, claiming she was entitled to maintain her standard of living, but the judge wasn't having it. "You used joint funds to sustain an extramarital lifestyle," the judge said during our latest hearing, flipping through the thick file Jacob had prepared. "This court doesn't reward such behavior." By the end of the hearing, the terms were clear. I'd have full custody of the kids, with Rachel granted supervised visitation until she could demonstrate stability. The financials were equally devastating for her. She was ordered to repay a portion of the misused funds and was left with little beyond her salary and personal savings. When the ruling was finalized, I felt a surge of relief, but it was bittersweet. The marriage was officially over, but the emotional scars remained. That evening, I sat with the kids at Nate's trying to figure out how to explain it all. Ethan, ever the perceptive one, was the first to bring it up. "Dad," he said, setting down his dinner plate, "are you and Mom getting divorced?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. "Yes," I said carefully, meeting his gaze. "We are. But it's not because of anything you or your siblings did. Your mom and I just can't stay married anymore." "Is it because of her boyfriends?" he asked bluntly. I froze. "Where did you hear that?" "I heard Mom and Aunt Susan talking about it," he said, shrugging. I took a deep breath. "Ethan, there are things that happened between your mom and me that I wish you didn't have to hear about. But what matters now is that I'm here for you. Always." He nodded, his expression serious. "Okay, Dad. I trust you." Over the next few weeks, I focused on rebuilding a sense of normalcy for the kids. We moved out of Nate's house and into a new rental, far from the neighborhood where everything had fallen apart. It wasn't much, a modest 3-bedroom with a small yard, but it was ours. I took over the morning routines, the school pickups, the bedtime stories. Every moment with them reminded me why I'd fought so hard. They were my anchor, the reason I didn't crumble under the weight of it all. As for Rachel, she stayed quiet. The shame of everything going public seemed to keep her in check. Her visits with the kids were polite but distant, and I could tell she struggled with how much she'd lost. One day, during a handoff, she finally spoke up. "Alex," she said, her voice softer than I'd heard in months. "I know I've made mistakes, but I want you to know
I'm sorry.
for everything." I looked at her, searching for sincerity. Maybe she meant it. Maybe she didn't. At that moment, it didn't matter. "I hope you figure things out, Rachel," I said, keeping my tone even. "For the kids' sake." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes, but I didn't stay to see her break down. I had my own life to rebuild, and I wasn't looking back. The divorce was finalized, the custody battle settled, and Rachel's presence in my life reduced to brief, awkward exchanges during her supervised visits with the kids. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. But starting over was a lot harder than I'd anticipated. Moving into a new home helped. The house wasn't much, but it was a fresh start. I set up each of the kids' rooms with care, making sure they felt comfortable and safe. The living room walls were bare, but it didn't matter. We had each other, and that was enough. The nights, though, were the hardest. After I'd put the kids to bed and the house fell silent, the memories crept in. I'd find myself staring at old family photos I hadn't yet boxed away, wondering how everything had unraveled so quickly. It wasn't just the betrayal that haunted me. It was the realization that I hadn't seen it coming. How had I missed the signs? Had I been too wrapped up in work? Too trusting? The questions ate at me, but I refused to let them define me. Work became my escape. I threw myself into every project, determined to provide a stable future for the kids. My colleagues noticed the shift. "You've been different lately," one of them, Karen, said during a lunch break. "More focused, sharper." "Divorce will do that to you," I replied, offering a half smile. Karen nodded, her expression softening. "For what it's worth, you're handling it better than most people would." "Thanks," I said. "I'm trying." One weekend, I took the kids to a beach a couple of hours away. Watching them run along the shore, laughing and chasing waves, something shifted in me. This was what mattered. Not the anger, not the revenge, but the moments that reminded me why I was still fighting. As Ethan built a sandcastle with his siblings, he glanced up at me. "You're smiling, Dad," he said, grinning. "I am," I admitted, realizing it was true. For the first time in a long time, I felt something close to happiness. Over time, I started to find myself again. I reconnected with old friends, joined a local gym, and even went on a few dates. It was strange, awkward even, but it reminded me that life didn't end with Rachel. One night, after a particularly good date, I sat on the porch with a glass of whiskey, staring out at the quiet street. My phone buzzed with a notification. A message from Rachel. Asterisk, thank you for taking care of the kids so well. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope someday you'll find it in you to forgive me. Asterisk. I stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to tell her she didn't deserve anything from me. But another part, the part that wanted to move on, understood the value of letting go. After a long pause, I typed back, asterisk. I've moved on, Rachel. You should too. For the kids. Asterisk. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a step. A year after the storm began, life finally felt steady again. The kids were thriving in their new routine, and I was finding a sense of balance I hadn't felt in years. The pain of Rachel's betrayal didn't disappear entirely. It lingered, like a scar, but it no longer defined me. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I sat down at my desk to go through some paperwork. A folder with old photos caught my eye, tucked away in a drawer I hadn't opened since the move. Inside were snapshots of vacations, birthdays, and moments that once felt perfect. I didn't feel anger as I looked through them, just a quiet sadness for what could have been. I took the folder, placed it in a box with other remnants of the past, and sealed it shut. Some things were better left behind. The turning point came unexpectedly. I'd signed up for a community volunteering project, a simple initiative to build housing for low-income families. It was something to keep me busy, but it ended up being so much more. On the second day, I met someone, Sophia. She was on the project too, hammering nails and hauling wood like she'd been doing it her whole life. She had this infectious laugh and a way of making everyone feel at ease. We talked during breaks, and by the end of the week, I found myself smiling in ways I hadn't in months. Coffee? She asked on the last day, holding up her thermos. Sure, I said, chuckling, but only if you promise it's better than mine. Her eyes sparkled. You'll just have to find out. Sophia wasn't a cure for the past, but she became a part of the future. We took things slow, dating cautiously, meeting the kids after months of getting to know each other. The kids loved her, especially Ethan, who declared, "She's way cooler than you, Dad," after one of her impromptu baking lessons. For the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a future that wasn't clouded by betrayal. Rachel still saw the kids occasionally, but her presence in my life had faded to almost nothing. She was a ghost of the person I thought I knew, but that no longer mattered. I wasn't holding on to anger or resentment. I didn't have room for it anymore. One day, as I sat on the porch watching the kids play in the yard, Sophia joined me, a cup of coffee in hand. "You look peaceful," she said, handing me the mug. "I think I am," I replied, realizing it was true. The road to this moment had been brutal, but sitting there, surrounded by laughter and love, I knew one thing for sure. I'd survived. And for the first time in a long time, I was happy.